Dr. Sharma, I have a question. I have been sort of introduced to the field of Hinduism and at McGill, and I was introduced to this notion of interdining. There sort of seems to be a lot of etiquette in the sort of Hindu.
Yes, yeah.
And I was wondering if you could explain to me a little bit more about that.
Yes, Matilda, I'll try. This is, of course, an aspect of Hinduism which strikes most observers as unusual. This has something to do with the concept of what is usually called caste, in as much as people tend to dine with members of their caste and marry within their own caste. So it's a part of that set of rules. But it also has to do with ritual purity, which has to be observed when one performs certain ceremonies or rites. I believe you have in mind the fact that food taken from some people is not acceptable, or rather taking food from some people is not acceptable, and that A may be able to accept food from B, but B cannot accept food from A, and rules of this kind. Yeah, one has to keep a historical factor in mind when trying to understand the virtual obsession at times in some sections of Hinduism, some groups of Hinduism, with the rules of or the etiquette of interdining. What one has to keep in mind is that Hindus have had the experience of being ruled over by non-Hindus for a longer period of time in history than perhaps of any other religious community, than perhaps is the case with any other religious community, with the possible exception of the Jews. What this meant was that Hinduism was pushed out of the public square, which belonged to the rulers who followed another religion. So the tradition became a very private tradition. And as it shrunk into the private domain, this is where the tradition took its stand against foreign rule in the face of military failure or political failure. So utensils became the kind of new weapons in this battle. Basically, what was being said was, you may have defeated us in battle, but we are not going to eat with you as an act of defiance. So this probably allows us to take a slightly different view of these rules.
Well, yeah, thank you for that. That really helps me understand the history of it. Do you feel like it should still be that way, or is there a sense that maybe it's a little bit uncomfortable to maintain that kind of strict interdining rule?
I found it helpful to think of these issues in terms of the contrast between purity and charity. I take this cue from the statement sometimes made that given the choice, Hinduism tends to veer more towards purity and Buddhism towards charity. And the way I see it, the distinction can also be applied to the conduct of a tradition in its history. One could suggest, for instance, that when traditions feel under siege, they tend to opt for purity as a form of defense. It's their version of the flight and fight response. When they are not under siege and more comfortable or comfortably placed in relation to other traditions, then they probably tend to opt for charity rather than purity. And if we look at Hinduism through this prism, then yes, I think what you just said seems to be the case. Now that the country has been independent for almost 70 years and has survived as a political entity, even as a democratic and secular political entity, then it is no longer subject to the same psychology which it might have developed in politically less fortunate times. And in fact, this is what we observe in India, that these rules are now on their way out, and people do not feel any compunction or any great compunction in bypassing them. Such a fundamental human instinct as eating together could actually be a great way of promoting interfaith harmony in India. It might sound a bit flippant the way I put it, but I'm saying it seriously, that one way of overcoming interfaith differences in India would be if people of all the religions just started partying together.